This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Our purpose is to demonstrate that people can have different political views and still have civilized discussions about potentially contentious topics. We believe that being right is not as important as the relationships we have with our fellow citizens that enable us to share this country. Today's topic is, what do we want America to be? Our discussion panel today, beginning on my left, is Patty Haskins. Patty is a retired math teacher from Wadsworth High School and Democratic member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Ron Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services and member of the Medina County Republican Executive Committee. And on his left is Jerry Ritzman, partner of Ritzman's Natural Health Pharmacies. We begin today with Patty Haskins. Patty, the United States of America was founded as a great experiment in self-government, and throughout its history has been known as democracy's greatest success story. We find ourselves in the post-Cold War era as the world's only superpower, and many of us are confused as to exactly what that means. So I'm asking you, do we have a special responsibility to be the world's peacemaker, to spread democracy, to encourage free enterprise, to assure health and prosperity for the world? Or should we just concentrate on providing the highest possible standard of living for our citizens?
I'll start with, I think obviously our primary goal as a country is to provide the highest possible standard of living for our citizens. But as you say, the only true world superpower, I think with that power comes a certain responsibility. And that's where the other areas that you spoke of come into play. As far as our role on being a peacemaker, I think yes, where we can be of assistance and helping to settle disagreements in countries or between countries so as that they do not evolve into some type of worldwide confrontation, I think it's our necessity and our responsibility to do so. Problem with that is I don't feel that we should be able to do it or shouldn't be doing it unilaterally. We should have support of our allies, either through the UN, just through individual agreements. That's what we have done in the past. I also think that we need to have as our primary goal in dealing with peacemaking to use tactful and diplomatic means by which to solve problems where possible. Obviously, there are times when force is a necessity, but that should not be the first and only option. Now, of course, if there's an attack upon our country or upon our peoples, then we may need to look at those priorities.
What about our allies?
And in that case, yes, we can. But it depends. I think you still try the tactful method and the diplomatic method first. You mentioned spreading democracy. All of us value our democratic values that we have in this country. All of us value our Constitution. And when we have a situation where a country wants to adopt a democratic system, I think that's wonderful, and that's what we should be doing. I don't think it's our job as a country to impose our democratic values upon other countries. If they're looking at a different type of regime, that is perhaps better. There have been too many times in the past where we as a country have assisted in the change of government, and we ended up getting a lot more than we bargained for. Example that comes to mind is Cuba, and how we supported rebels, and we ended up with Castro against after Batista was ousted.
But let me ask you this: would you agree then that during the Bush administration, the strategy to spread democracy throughout the Mideast was misguided?
Yes, I do. I think if it were welcomed in those countries, and we do have, in the Mideast, we do have, Israel that is a democratic government, and there are there are still those that wish this. Unfortunately, what's happening in some countries, I mean, I think we're seeing this in Egypt and others, that what we think is going to be a democratic government that comes in isn't. And we end up in some cases with a more restrictive, more dictatorial government than was originally in place. You mentioned encouraging free enterprise, health, and prosperity. I think when there are problems as far as the use of the sarin gas, for example, in Syria, in cases like in Somalia or Rwanda, and in Bosnia, Herzegovina, all of those places where there have been these huge atrocities, it is imperative, I think, for us to step in and see what can be done as far as providing assistance and aid. Of course, then comes the question, should it be governmental aid or should it be private aid? And should it be sparked by the American people or should it be sparked by our government? I personally feel it can be a combination of the two. Unfortunately, where we have stepped in more often than not, some would say, this has been done where we have an vested interest. For example, in oil-rich lands, we're very quick to go in to protect the government that's in play, good or bad, because we have an economic interest with them.
We've got a stake in stability in those areas.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of this it can be seen now with Syria, and the concern with Syria too, if we become too involved, we're not really sure who the good guys are in Syria. I'm not sure there are good guys in Syria at this point. I mean, that's the concern. We know where we stand with Assad, but as far as the rebels, we're not sure what they're doing. So, it's an evolving world, and with the threat of nuclear warfare, with the threat of the doomsday bomb type thing, and a changing world, and dealing with Islamic nations, it's very different than what's been dealt with in the past.
Well, Ron, you and Patty are not generally that far apart. How about today?
And we're not this time either, but John, I can think of this really only in personal terms. I'm America, you are America, we are America. Just as we as individuals are capable of the basest thoughts and actions and the most noble and exalted facts and thoughts and actions, so too is America. Just as we are capable of being outgoing and generous and stingy and withdrawn, so too is America. On the domestic front, we need to do things like, sure, support welfare programs, support food stamps for people. At the same time, let's not cut things like Head Start, which gives people the education to gain the opportunities to get off of these dependent systems and to contribute more fully. Let's not cancel things like the National Endowment for the Arts, because philosophical health and that sort of health is just as important as physical health, in my opinion. On the foreign front, yes, let's help with humanitarian aid. Let's help Africa get out of the throes of HIV. Let's help governments, as Patty says, if they want to have a democratic government or something that of that sort, yes, we should help them very, very, very carefully and very fully. At the same time, we must respect the culture and the beliefs of other countries. Just because they're different from our own doesn't mean we need to reject them. We have to try to find a common ground. Now, that's from my liberal point of view. But
I guess I've never expected that much passion from you. This is a subject you've been giving some thought to. How about you, Bryan?
Well, John, I think this is a very timely topic, and we see currently the problems that a lack of leadership creates in the world with just Syria and Egypt and some of the issues that have taken place in the Middle East. It's disappointing that as a country, for the principles that we stand on and that we espouse, we'll work universally. I don't believe there's ever been a war that we have fought that we have actually maintained ground or, taken home any sort of booty, you could say. We have, the only thing that we have asked for is Patty says Texas.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we can argue that one. But I think this current piece that I brought this morning from this morning's Wall Street Journal basically sums it up for me, and it's the Laurel and Hardy presidency. Our current president and his leading from behind attitude has created these situations. I guess I fall somewhere between Teddy Roosevelt's speak softly and carry a big stick to Ronald Reagan's peace through strength. And when a country like Syria was told a year ago that if they crossed the red line, and that red line was using chemical weapons on their population, that the response, in my own term, would be lethal and quick.
Where do we get off telling Syria that they've crossed the red line?
Well, and this comes from our ability as a superpower to say to countries, you're not going to use chemical weapons.
So we're the biggest guy on the block.
We're the biggest guy on the block, exactly.
And we'll tell you what to do.
And when we decide, and when we just abdicate that and sit back, these are the problems that we're going to have. And that will spread to other countries. And so if you want to look at it as a process of containment, diplomacy only works if your words have weight. And it's obvious with the characters of Assad and different dictators that our words really don't carry any more weight, because he would have thought twice before he used chemical weapons. Now, if we're to believe the current administration that chemical weapons were used, and I believe our government, I believe our president, and when he says that chemical weapons were used on the population in Syria, that an action should take place. Not the beginning of talks. An action should take place. So if you're not willing to back it up, then he shouldn't have said what he said. Okay, I look at this as a very simple parenting situation. If you tell your child that if they do X, Y is going to happen. When X happens, Y has to happen. The consequence has to happen. And our president currently made a statement, whether we agreed with it or not, that if X happened, Y would happen, and now Y has not happened. And that message reverberates throughout the world to all these bad actors, that it doesn't make any difference what the United States or the president, who basically is the default leader of the world. It's pretty well established that the United States is a superpower, and our president is sort of the default leader of the world, that when he says, if we want to be the referee or the umpire, if he says this is what's going to happen, it has to happen, whether we believe it right or wrong. We have to have consequences, and now we're dealing with this mess in Syria. So,
Jerry, I don't know about you, but I detect that a red line has been drawn right down through the middle of this panel.
Well, I don't know.
What side of it are you on?
I'm going to try and blur that line a little bit. Because I think that so many of the question is, should we be the policemen of the world? And I think that in the field of foreign affairs, that at least I am, and probably a lot of the U.S. population is somewhat naive in all the interactions that do and can go on between different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds. And so I don't understand all those intricacies. But on a large scale, it seems that many times we try and get involved in conflicts which are truly a civil war, which is sometimes sustained by sectarian strife. And I don't know if we can actually solve those civil war situations, or if we should. If we'd have huge protests and maybe not to the point of civil war, but approaching that here in this country, what would be our reaction if another country came in and imposed their will upon the disagreements or the conflicts that are taking place between our citizens?
But we're different. We're the biggest guy on the block.
That's right.
We are exceptional.
Right.
And we are the world leader, according to Bryan.
Right.
Doesn't that make a difference? Doesn't that give us the right?
And I would answer that with a very definitive, it depends. What did we do in Rwanda? I mean, what did we do in some of the other areas where there was genocide? I think we really lucked out in Kosovo and the Balkans to bring that to some sense of stability, but that took a long time And I remember trying to understand, what is this conflict going on over in the Balkans? And I didn't understand all the differences in the Muslims versus Christians and different nationalities, and all the all the little conflicts and different groups that were taking place there. And I think that happens in a lot of countries. Can we go in and impose order in those situations? Maybe temporarily, with a long-lasting physical presence. But if we're going to get in, we need to get in and do it. But sometimes I just think we have to realize that this may not be something that we can resolve.
Interesting that you should mention Rwanda, and I think it probably is a classical case of the kind of conflict that we run into in this country. There was, for all practical purposes, a Holocaust that occurred in Rwanda. And as it was underway, our President Clinton at the time was under a lot of pressure to do something about it. And he did. He dispatched troops. Then he took a tremendous amount of heat in this country for sending troops to Rwanda, and he brought them home. Remember, this is a president that lived by polls, and he did not want to be doing an unpopular thing. But later on, after he was out of the presidency, he did acknowledge that was the biggest blunder he made, was to not go in and try to stop this massacre. 2.5 million people, something like that, were literally hacked to death with machetes. It was a terrible thing. But we've got the idea now that on the table, whether or not we should be the world's policeman, and whether we like it or not, we have been, I think, to some extent ever since the end of World War II. That practically every president that we've had since, well, including Truman, accepted. Pardon me?
The Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
That would be a whole program to talk just about that. But the fact is, though, that every president has taken a stand against the expansion of communism. So we just accepted on faith that communism is bad, and we're the good guys, and we need to do something to stop it, whether it's in Korea or Vietnam or Turkey or Greece, or where the Truman Doctrine began our active status in defending the world against communism. But still, as the world's policeman, we have 173,000 troops spread over 150 countries. Now, granted, some of them are no more than Marine Guards at the embassy out of that 150 countries, but still in all, we have 53,000 troops in Japan alone. 53,000. We've got 46,000 in Germany, over 28,000 in Korea, 11,000 in Italy, and 10,000 in the UK. Now, granted, we're not totally paranoid about somebody attacking Italy, I don't think. But to have troops spread around gives us this global presence. It gives us an immediate strike capability from practically any place to fight off practically any threat. And I'm wondering if the rest of the world is really ready to accept us, or do they accept us in playing that role?
I say no, and I don't think they should. From my point of view, the use of force is seldom justified. There have got to be better ways. Diplomacy backed up, yeah. How backed up? I don't know. Nonviolence may work. It's never been tried. I kept thinking as a philosophical question, after 9/11, what would have happened had we said to the Islamic world, yeah, you have some justification for what you did. We forgive you. Now let's work on and move together, work together.
I think that's a very noble way to look at problems when you're dealing with rational people. But our enemies have always been irrational. And the troops that we have were not placed there arbitrarily by us. They were a result of conflicts that would have expanded and changed our world as we know it. Hitler was a threat, a viable threat, and had taken over most of Europe. Study history and how these things spread. Korea. Those troops are there to keep the North Koreans from coming into South Korea. And I would dare say, just having that presence, and I break it down locally. When you're driving down the road and you see a police car parked in the middle of the median, I immediately slow down. That's a deterrent. Now, there are some communities, they park an unoccupied police car. Wadsworth has a car that has a little sign that flashes your speed. And I immediately slow down because I don't know what that officer is prepared to do. If I'm blasting down the road and all of a sudden I see that state trooper in the median, I slow down. I look at our troops stationed throughout the world as that policeman that says, we're here, you might want to pause before you decide to come across the 38th parallel. You might want to pause Russia, and it hasn't been until recently that the Russian threat of overtaking Europe was viable, it was credible, and this was all part of that blocking move. If you study the strategy and the tactical nature of these particular wars, was to slow down the Russians. So wherever you've mentioned we have troops, there have been conflicts that have necessitated the United States to be there.
Speaking of Korea, I don't remember who the man was now, but the statement was quite interesting. He said, we don't have anything to worry about with North Korean troops going across the 38th parallel into South Korea. The minute they encounter their first supermarket, they know they've been lied to. And they're going to put down their guns and go shopping.
That would be true.
I just have a basic problem with seeing attacking, battles, war as a first choice. I mean, I even look back at Iraq and how Iraq was started, and the reasons that we're going in there. We want to protect oil interests. We want to do this. We want to do that. You come up with WMDs that don't exist. We go in, and how many years were we in Iraq?
You could say the same thing about Syria. You could say the same thing about Syria. Assad has stuck to his guns up until recently that he did not have chemical weapons. Yeah, but he came out and said that. And when you look at Iraq, and I think it's
Iraq didn't have them,
there was a lot of talk up until the time that we committed troops to Iraq. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it's very similar to what has happened just recently.
But that was still faulty intel. They did not have it. We do know that Syria does. And you talked about the red line, and Obama was ready to send in troops. He decided to go to Congress first and ask them for their approval, which is what they wanted.
But that's a spin. That's a spin on a narrative.
No, that's not a spin on a narrative.
It's a spin on a narrative that makes him seem like he's solved the problem, which he didn't solve the problem. He had the problem. He put down the red line, and this goes back to the original argument that I'm making, that the consequence needs to be a follow-through.
So you want to have troops go in?
No, I don't want to have troops go down. I want the response to be lethal and swift, whether that's tomahawks, whether that's throwing an aircraft carrier off the beach there and flying sorties over his country to isolate him. That's what I want to see happen.
And you didn't want him to get the consent of Congress.
He should have, if he was as smart as he says he is, he should have had this all in place, because I believe that our country has enough information on the problems of the world that we should be able to anticipate.
Getting back to civil discussions, I think that
I think this is invigorating.
Iraq is probably a very, very good place to conduct a study on civility. Here we were with a situation back in the, when was it? The first Gulf War was in
1990.
Anyway, whenever it was. Here Iraq had invaded Kuwait. They had this long-standing claim to the oil fields and so forth. So we waged a very popular war and kicked them out of Kuwait, but we did not go in to do regime change. The president at the time, the first George Bush, said, I don't have the authority to do that. Congress only authorized us to go and remove them from Kuwait. But we had members of the other party in Congress that were blasting him, including Al Gore. There's a famous video of him giving this horrible speech about what George Bush did wrong by not paying attention to the world's intel community and not going in. You know, fast forward. Now we are going in, and the speech is just as impassioned the other way. There was no civility in that debate at all. This is trying to win. I mean, this is what was, this was just plain taking sides and trying to win for the sake of the party. But I wanted to maybe shift this another direction before you two start swinging at each other.
We're not going to, we like each other.
That's why we have Jerry between, Grom between us.
When I think about the foreign aid bill, one of the things that was surprising to me that I just recently learned is that our government's contribution to other countries for humanitarian and military aid has been pretty stable, right around $50 billion for a number of years now. But the private aid that you had mentioned a while ago is $71 billion
Right.
from private organizations, humanitarian aid. I doubt that any of it is military aid. But the question we'll maybe want to tackle when we've got more time is, should we be spending more time and effort on that kind of aid, like the aid to wiping out HIV in Africa, which has been very successful. It's been credited with saving now about 5 million lives. I don't know how they count them, but it's been credited with that. But do you think that we should be spending more on that than thinking about tomahawks?
I would,
Yes.
I would
Yes,
say a resounding
absolutely.
yes to that.
I think it's the best investment in the future.
Yes.
It keeps people like Assad from coming to power.
Even though
Right.
a lot of people complain
Exactly.
about foreign aid.
We actually agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much. This has been a very invigorating, passionate discussion, and I appreciate it. And I'd like to leave you this thought from our president, Barack Obama. We, the people, recognize that we have responsibilities as well as rights, that our destinies are bound together, that a freedom which only asks, what's in it for me, is a freedom without commitment to others. A freedom without love or charity or duty or patriotism is unworthy of our founding ideals and those who died in their defense. Thank you very much.